Armen was a man who had given the best years of his life to the Navy. From the time he was young, he had always dreamed of serving his country. The sound of the ocean, the discipline of training, and the feeling of standing side by side with his team had shaped him into a man of strength and patience. His service had not been about recognition or fame. It was about duty, about doing the right thing when no one was watching. When he finally retired, Armen decided to live in a quiet coastal town. He wanted peace after years of long journeys across seas. Every morning he would wake up before sunrise, walk by the shore, and breathe the fresh air that carried the smell of salt and water. Neighbors saw him as a calm, polite man who never raised his voice. Children often gathered around him in the evenings, asking him to share stories of his life at sea. He would tell them about storms, about teamwork, and about the importance of never giving up, even when everything seemed difficult. Life seemed peaceful until one day he received an official letter. It was from the court. The letter stated that he had to appear before a judge regarding a piece of land. The land was not large, but it was special to Armen. It had belonged to his father, who had worked hard all his life to keep it. After his father passed away, the land had been passed down to Armen as part of his inheritance. However, a distant relative had raised a claim, saying the land did not fully belong to Armen. The matter, which could have been solved in private, was now being pushed into court. Armen was not a man who liked arguments or disputes, but he believed in fairness. He knew that the land rightfully belonged to him, and he had all the papers and documents to prove it. On the morning of the hearing, Armen prepared carefully. He wore a clean ironed shirt and polished his shoes. He placed the important documents neatly in a folder. Before leaving, he looked at the small photograph of his father that hung on the wall and whispered softly that he would protect what his father had left behind. When he reached the courthouse, the building was crowded with people. Some were nervous, others looked tired, and many simply waited for their names to be called. Armen sat quietly, his posture straight, his face calm. Years in the Navy had taught him patience. Finally, his name was called. Armen stood and walked toward the judge's bench. The judge, a man named Armen, sat high above the rest of the room. His expression was stern. His voice was sharp as he called out the names of people who came before him. Armen noticed how quickly others left the bench after speaking. Many walked away looking embarrassed or small, as though they had been scolded. Armen reached the front, stood respectfully, and greeted the judge with a polite tone. Before he could begin explaining his case, Judge Armen leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. In a voice loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, the judge said, "You may have been in the Navy once, but this is not the sea. This is a courtroom. Here you are just another man. Do not think your past uniform gives you any special right. Speak quickly and do not waste the court's time." The words were harsh and carried a weight that filled the room. A silence followed, broken only by quiet whispers among the people sitting in the back. Some exchanged surprised looks. Others stared at Armen, waiting to see how he would respond. For a moment, Armen stood still. The years of discipline in the Navy had prepared him for difficult situations, but this was different. He was not on a ship or in training. He was in a public place, being spoken to in a way that stripped him of respect. He felt the sting of humiliation, but his face remained calm. He did not lower his head. He did not show anger. Instead, he stood with dignity, the way he had always stood when facing storms at sea. Inside, however, he knew this was not just about land anymore. This was about respect, about the way people saw him. The humiliation he had just experienced in front of so many was something he could not ignore. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy after the judge's sharp words. People kept glancing at Armen as if waiting for a reaction. Armen took a slow breath and placed the folder of documents on the table before him. His voice was steady and calm when he began to speak. "Your Honor, this land was passed down to me by my late father. I have the legal documents to prove that it belongs to my family. I only wish for justice, nothing more." His words were polite and respectful, yet Judge Armen frowned as if irritated. Without even glancing at the papers, the judge waved his hand and said, "Do not waste this court's time with long speeches. Many people before you also bring papers, but that does not mean they are correct. You may think your past makes you important, but it does not matter here." The people sitting in the benches whispered again. Some of them were surprised at the judge's tone. A few even shook their heads, feeling sympathy for the retired Navy man. They could see Armen was speaking with honesty, Yet the judge showed no sign of listening. Armen remained composed. Years of service had taught him that losing patience never solved anything. He gently pushed the folder forward and said, "These are the original documents signed many years ago. If you would allow, they can be reviewed." The judge glanced at the folder but made no effort to open it. Instead, he looked down at Armen and said in a louder voice, "You think standing here with papers will change my view? This is not the Navy where people salute you. Here you are just another citizen, and I will not give you any special treatment." The words echoed again through the room. Some of the people in the courtroom looked away, uncomfortable at the sight of a man being spoken to in such a manner. Others, however, leaned forward, curious to see how the retired Navy officer would react. Armen's calmness surprised many. Instead of arguing, he stood straight with quiet dignity. He knew the truth was on his side. What he did not realize was that among the crowd, someone had already started recording the entire exchange on a mobile phone. The hearing ended quickly. Judge Armen did not give a clear decision that day. He postponed the case, saying he would review the documents at another time. Armen was told to leave, and as he walked out of the courtroom, people whispered behind him. Some admired his patience, while others felt disappointed at the way he had been treated. When Armen stepped outside into the sunlight, he took a deep breath. His heart was calm, yet his mind was thoughtful. He had been trained to endure storms, but what happened inside the courtroom was something new. It was not just a question of land anymore. It had become a matter of dignity, not only for himself but also for those who respected service and sacrifice. That evening, Armen returned home and placed the folder of documents back in its safe place. He sat in his chair by the window and looked at the sea. The waves rose and fell, just as they had during his years at sea. He thought about his father and about the promise he had made to protect what belonged to him. He also thought about the judge's words and how they had been spoken in front of so many. The next morning, Armen went about his routine as usual. He walked by the shore and greeted neighbors with his usual smile. What he did not know was that the video recorded in the courtroom was already spreading among people. At first it was shared among a few locals. Soon, however, it began reaching wider circles. People who watched the video were surprised at the judge's behavior and impressed by Armen's calm response. Many commented on his discipline, his patience, and the way he did not let anger take over, even when he was humiliated. His story began to spread, not only in his town but also beyond. By the end of the day, Armen received a call from a friend who told him that his name was appearing on social media platforms. The video of the courtroom exchange was being shared again and again. Thousands of people were commenting and many were supporting him. Armen was surprised but not overly excited. He had never cared about fame. Still, he understood that something bigger was happening. What began as a simple court hearing was now turning into a matter that the public was deeply interested in. The respect he had earned in silence throughout his life was now being recognized loudly by strangers who had never met him. Inside, Armen still felt the sting of the judge's harsh words, but he also felt something stronger rising within him. He knew this was not the end of the matter. The next few days in town felt very different. Wherever Armen went, people looked at him with new eyes. Shopkeepers greeted him with extra warmth. Children waved more eagerly, and even strangers approached him to shake his hand. At first, he did not understand why, but then one of his neighbors explained. The video of the courtroom scene had spread far and wide. It had been shared across the country, and thousands of people were talking about it. In the video, people saw a retired Navy man standing with dignity and patience while a judge spoke to him harshly. Many viewers admired the way Armen did not lose his temper and did not argue. They saw his calmness as a symbol of true strength. Messages of respect began to flood the online world, and soon news reporters were contacting people in his town, asking to know more about him. Armen himself was surprised at all this attention. He had never wanted fame. In his Navy years, he had always worked as part of a team, where success belonged to everyone and not to one individual. Now he was becoming a topic of national discussion, and it felt strange to him. Still, he accepted the kindness of people politely. He answered their questions with simple words and continued to live his daily routine as calmly as possible. Meanwhile, Judge Armen became aware that the video was spreading everywhere. The public reaction was strong, and many people openly criticized the way he had spoken in court. Some said that a judge should show fairness and respect to everyone, no matter who stood before him. Others said that the calmness of Armen only highlighted the unnecessary sharpness of the judge's words. In his private chambers, the judge felt uneasy. He was used to people fearing his voice and accepting his authority without question. Now, for the first time, his name was being spoken about in a negative way outside the walls of the court. But instead of softening his behavior, he grew more defensive. He told himself that the public did not understand the pressure of his position. He convinced himself that his authority must not be challenged. Back in town, Armen continued to receive messages of support. One evening, as he sat by the shore, a group of college students approached him. They told him how much they admired his patience in court. One of them said, "Sir, we learned more from the way you stood silent that day than we could learn from many books. You showed us that true strength does not need loud words." Armen smiled gently at their words. He thanked them and reminded them that respect is something one must give even when not received in return. His advice touched them deeply, and they left with even greater respect for him. News channels soon picked up the story, and reporters began to visit Armen's town. They wanted to interview the retired Navy man whose calmness had gone viral. At first, Armen refused politely. He told them he was not interested in attention, but when he realized that people were genuinely looking up to him as an example, he agreed to share his thoughts. In one interview, he said, "My service in the Navy taught me discipline, patience, and the importance of dignity. In life, we may face moments when others speak to us in a way that hurts. What matters is how we respond. Anger creates more problems, but patience allows truth to shine." The interview touched many hearts. Clips of his words were shared widely, and people praised his wisdom. He became a symbol of calm strength for many young people who admired the way he carried himself. At the same time, the property case was still pending. The next hearing was scheduled, and this time more people were planning to attend, curious to see what would happen. Armen knew he would need to face the judge again. He was not nervous, but he was thoughtful. He understood that the courtroom was no longer just about his small piece of land. It had become a stage where the values of respect and fairness were being tested. On the day before the next hearing, Armen sat at his table with the folder of documents once more. He reviewed the papers carefully, making sure everything was in order. He prayed silently for strength and clarity. For him, it was not about winning or losing. It was about standing for what was right with dignity. The next morning, as he prepared to go to court, he noticed that outside his home, a small group of supporters had gathered. They were ordinary townspeople who respected him. They wished him well and told him that they trusted him to stand strong. Armen smiled and thanked them, carrying with him the quiet support of many hearts as he walked once again toward the courthouse. The morning of the second hearing arrived with a quiet buzz across town. Many people had heard about the case, and the courthouse seemed busier than usual. Some had come out of curiosity, while others came because they felt inspired by Armen's calmness in the first hearing. They wanted to see how he would face the judge again. When Armen entered the building, people greeted him with nods and smiles. He returned every greeting politely, carrying himself with the same dignity as before. His steps were firm but not hurried. He held his folder of documents close, the same ones he had carefully prepared once again the night before. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Judge Armen sat in his chair, his face stern as always. Yet this time he could feel the many eyes watching him closely. He knew the public was paying attention, not only in the room but also outside through the eyes of reporters and cameras. Still, he was determined to keep his authority. When Armen's case was called, he walked forward with steady steps. He stood tall and greeted the court with respect. The judge looked at him for a moment, then spoke in a sharp voice. "So you have returned. I hope you have something new to say. Do not waste the court's time." The words once again carried an edge, but the audience reacted differently this time. A quiet murmur spread through the benches, and many shook their heads. They had come to see fairness, but they were seeing impatience. Armen did not react. He opened his folder and placed the papers before the judge. "Your Honor," he said in a calm tone, "these documents clearly show that the land in question belongs to my family. They are signed by the proper authorities and kept safe for many years. I request that you review them." For a moment, the judge remained still. Then, perhaps to show he was not ignoring the evidence, he picked up the documents. He flipped through them quickly, though his expression remained cold. Anyone can bring papers, he muttered. But he did not dismiss them entirely this time. The lawyer representing the other side tried to argue, but the audience was watching closely. Many people seemed unconvinced by the lawyer's words. Their attention remained on Armen, who continued to stand quietly, his face calm, his posture strong. Someone in the back whispered, "Look at the way he stands, like he is unshaken." Another replied, "That is the strength of discipline. He does not need to raise his voice to be heard." The judge, perhaps aware of the whispers, grew uneasy. He cleared his throat and said, "This court will review the matter further. Until then, there will be no final decision." His words were meant to sound firm, but they only gave the impression that he was delaying. When the hearing ended, Armen walked out of the courtroom. This time, people followed him outside. Reporters asked questions, townspeople offered words of encouragement, and some even clapped softly as he passed. Armen remained humble. He answered only a few questions and reminded everyone that he was simply standing for what was right. That evening, his story reached national news once more. Headlines spoke of the retired Navy man who faced the judge with calm dignity. News channels replayed his short statements outside the court, and once again, people praised his composure. Social media filled with comments calling him an example of true patience and respect. Back in his home, Armen sat by the window again, watching the sea. He thought about everything that had happened. He had never imagined that his small land dispute would become such a public matter. Yet he understood why people felt moved. In a world where many answered harshness with anger, he had chosen patience. That choice was now shining as a lesson for many. The next day, children came running to his house, eager to hear what had happened in court. They listened with wide eyes as he told them that dignity matters more than pride, and patience is stronger than anger. The children nodded, their young minds absorbing his words like a lesson for the future. As days passed, more letters and calls came from people across the country. Some were strangers who had seen his story and wanted to thank him. Others were veterans like him who felt proud that one of their own was showing such strength of character in public. Armen read their words carefully, feeling a quiet gratitude in his heart. Meanwhile, Judge Armen was not at peace. The more the public praised Armen, the more questions were raised about his own behavior. He knew that at the next hearing all eyes would be on him again. The weight of public opinion was pressing on his shoulders, and for the first time he began to wonder how he should face it. Armen, however, was not worried. He carried himself with the same calmness as always, preparing silently for whatever was to come. The days leading up to the next hearing felt like a wave of attention for Armen. Every morning, when he stepped outside for his walk by the shore, people stopped him to offer encouragement. Some handed him small notes of respect, while others simply said, "We are proud of you." Armen accepted their kindness with humility. He never acted as if he was someone special. He always reminded them that patience and truth were not his alone, but values everyone could live by. In the meantime, television channels continued to replay his story. Many anchors described him as a man of quiet strength. They showed clips of him standing calmly in court while the judge spoke harshly. They also played recordings of his interviews, where his words about dignity and patience had touched many hearts. His story was no longer just about land. It had become a symbol of how a person should carry themselves in the face of challenge. Judge Armen, on the other hand, was feeling the weight of public judgment. He had always been feared in the courtroom, but now his name was being questioned outside those walls. Every newspaper that praised Armen seemed to reflect poorly on him. He told himself that he was only doing his job, but deep inside, he knew that his behavior had drawn unnecessary attention. On the morning of the third hearing, the courthouse was more crowded than ever. Reporters stood outside with their cameras, townspeople filled the benches, and even people from neighboring towns had come to watch. They wanted to see not just a property case, but the way Armen and the judge would face each other again. When Armen entered, the crowd grew silent. He walked with the same calm steps, his folder of documents in his hand. He greeted those who nodded to him, but his focus remained steady. He was not there for applause or attention. He was there for truth. As he stood before the judge again, there was a moment of silence. Judge Armen looked at him with eyes that seemed unsure. He could feel the weight of the crowd, the reporters, and the cameras that would share every word beyond the courtroom. For the first time, his voice did not sound as sharp when he spoke. "Do you have anything to add to your case?" the judge asked, his tone more measured. Armen nodded respectfully. "Your Honor, I believe the documents are clear. The land belongs to my family. I stand here not asking for favor but for fairness." The courtroom listened closely. Armen's words were not long, but they carried strength. They reminded people that sometimes simplicity speaks louder than arguments. The judge glanced at the documents again, this time with more attention. He cleared his throat and announced that the papers would be studied carefully and that a decision would be given soon. Though his words were still cautious, it was clear he could not ignore the matter any longer. As Armen left the courtroom, the people outside began to cheer softly. Reporters crowded around him asking questions, but he spoke only briefly. "I believe in fairness. I believe in patience. That is all I wish to say." His simple statement was recorded and quickly spread across television screens and social media. That evening, as he sat by the sea, Armen reflected on everything. He thought about his father, who had taught him to value honesty. He thought about his years in the Navy, where discipline had guided every action. He also thought about how life sometimes places people in unexpected positions. He had never wanted to be the center of national attention, yet here he was becoming a voice for patience and dignity. Children came again to listen to him that evening. One boy asked, "Uncle, are you not angry at the judge?" Armen smiled gently and replied, "Anger may burn quickly, but it also fades quickly. Patience lasts longer and shines brighter. If we want truth to win, we must give it the strength of patience." The children nodded, their young faces glowing with understanding. For them, Armen was no longer just a retired Navy officer. He had become a living lesson in how to face the world with grace. In another part of town, Judge Armen sat in his chamber late at night. The courtroom had ended, but the voices of the public were still ringing in his ears. He looked at the newspapers spread across his desk, each carrying Armen's story. For the first time in many years, he began to question himself. Was his pride greater than justice? The question lingered, and he could not easily push it away. As the days passed, the nation continued to watch. Everyone waited for the judge's final decision. But more than the outcome of the land case, people seemed to care about the values the case represented. And Armen, in his quiet home by the sea, continued to live as he always had, with patience, dignity, and the calm strength of a man who believed in truth. The days leading to the next hearing brought even greater attention to Armen's story. News channels announced updates. Social media continued to share his calm words, and people from different parts of the country wrote messages of respect. Armen, however, lived as he always had. He woke early, walked by the sea, greeted his neighbors, and spent evenings speaking with children who loved his stories. Fame did not change his daily rhythm, yet he could not ignore the thought of the courtroom. The land case was still not settled, and though he was confident in his documents, he knew that justice was not always quick. He kept telling himself that patience was the strongest tool he had. His father's voice echoed in his memory, reminding him that truth does not need loudness, it needs steadiness. On the morning of the next hearing, the courthouse was filled beyond expectation. Reporters with cameras lined the entrance. Townspeople filled every bench, and some stood in the corridors just to be present. Many had come not for the legal matter itself, but to witness the way Armen carried himself. He had become a symbol of dignity in their eyes. When Armen entered, the room grew quiet. His steps were calm, and his face showed no sign of stress. He held his folder of documents as carefully as before and greeted the court with respect. The judge looked at him, and for the first time, his expression was not only stern but also thoughtful. Judge Armen had spent many sleepless nights. The criticism he faced in the press, the whispers in his courtroom, and the admiration Armen received had all worked upon his mind. He knew the eyes of the nation were upon him, and his pride now battled with the need for fairness. The session began. The lawyer for the opposing side repeated his arguments, but the crowd seemed uninterested. Their eyes were fixed on Armen. When it was his turn, Armen spoke in his steady voice. "Your Honor, I have nothing new to add. My documents remain the same, and the truth remains the same. I ask only for justice to be seen clearly." His words were short, but they carried weight. The judge looked down at the papers again, flipping through them more carefully than before. The courtroom remained silent, as if everyone was waiting for him to finally recognize what was obvious. The judge announced that the case was still under review, but his tone was softer. He did not use the sharpness that had once echoed across the room. Instead, he seemed almost cautious. He ended the session quickly, promising that a clear decision would soon be given. As Armen stepped outside, the crowd surrounded him again. Reporters pushed microphones forward, townspeople clapped, and strangers spoke words of encouragement. Armen raised his hand gently to quiet them and said, "My friends, this is not about me. It is about fairness for everyone. If we hold patience in our hearts, truth will always find its place." The crowd responded with cheers, and his words were soon broadcast across the nation. More than ever, Armen was being seen as a voice of wisdom. People quoted his lines, shared his interviews, and praised his calm strength. That evening, Armen sat by the sea, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The waves moved with steady rhythm, and he thought of how life was similar. Storms may rise, but the sea always finds calm again. He whispered to himself that patience was like the tide, always steady, always returning. Meanwhile, in his office, Judge Armen sat alone. He read the newspapers that covered the case, each one carrying Armen's picture and words. The more he read, the heavier he felt. He realized that the people now looked at Armen as an example of dignity. The question burned inside him. Could he continue as before, or would he have to change? In the town, people waited with great interest. They spoke in tea shops, in markets, and in their homes about the case. Many said the decision was already clear, since the documents were strong. Others said that more than the land, the case was about the values of respect, truth, and patience. Children continued to visit Armen, eager to hear from him. He told them about his years at sea, about teamwork, and about facing storms without fear. Each story carried a lesson about life, and the children listened as if he were a teacher. For them, he had become more than a retired officer. He was a guide who showed them that strength was not in loudness but in calmness. As the days grew closer to the final hearing, anticipation spread everywhere. People wondered if the judge would finally give a fair decision. They also wondered how Armen would respond, no matter what the outcome. But Armen himself did not worry. He carried his calm strength, certain that truth always stood taller than pride. The day of the final hearing arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. People from town and nearby areas gathered early outside the courthouse. Reporters set up their cameras, and even strangers had come just to witness the conclusion of the case. The story of Armen had traveled far, and everyone wanted to see how the last chapter would unfold. Armen prepared himself that morning as he had for every hearing. He put on a clean shirt, polished his shoes, and held the folder of documents that represented the truth of his family's land. He walked to the courthouse with calm steps, aware that people were watching him, but focused only on fairness. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was different this time. People were quiet, but there was a sense of expectation in the air. Judge Armen sat higher on his bench, his face composed yet thoughtful. He had spent many nights thinking about the case and the way Armen had conducted himself. For the first time, he seemed aware that this hearing was not just about land. It was about fairness, patience, and respect. When Armen's name was called, he walked forward with steady confidence. He greeted the court respectfully and placed his documents on the table. The judge looked at him and said, "You have waited patiently. I will review everything carefully today and make a fair decision." His words were calm, lacking the sharpness of the past. Armen nodded. His calm face showed no sign of pride or anger. He knew that patience and truth were stronger than words or appearances. He began explaining briefly the history of the land, the documents, and the reason why it belonged to his family. His voice was steady and clear, and the people listening could feel his sincerity. The lawyer representing the other side tried to present arguments, but they seemed weaker in comparison to the evidence and Armen's calm explanation. People in the courtroom whispered to each other, impressed with the dignity and clarity with which Armen spoke. His simple words carried more power than long speeches could have. Judge Armen reviewed the documents carefully, taking time to examine every signature and statement. The audience waited silently, feeling the tension and the importance of what was happening. For many, this hearing had become a lesson in how respect and truth can be shown through calmness. Finally, after reviewing the documents, Judge Armen spoke. I have studied the papers and listened to both sides. It is clear that the land belongs to Mr. Armen. The documents are genuine and the claims against him are not supported. Therefore, the court recognizes that this property rightly belongs to him. A quiet cheer spread through the courtroom. People clapped softly, respecting the solemnity of the moment while celebrating justice. Armen stood still, his calm expression unchanged. He thanked the judge respectfully and collected his folder. His victory was quiet but complete. Outside the courthouse, a larger crowd had gathered. When Armen stepped out, people greeted him with applause and words of admiration. Reporters pushed forward to interview him. He smiled gently and said, "I only followed patience and truth. That is all anyone needs to do to find justice." The statement was shared widely in newspapers, on television, and across social media. People praised not only the fairness of the decision but also the example Armen had set. He had shown that dignity, calmness, and respect could overcome harsh words and challenges. In the evening, Armen returned home and sat by the sea. The waves moved as they always had, steady and peaceful. He thought about the long journey from the first hearing to this day. He remembered the whispers, the harsh words, the public attention, and how he had remained calm through it all. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that truth and patience had won. Children came again to listen to him, and he told them, "Life will give you challenges, and sometimes people will speak harshly or unfairly. Always remain calm, speak truthfully, and never lose respect for others. That is how you win without raising your voice." The town and many beyond it remembered this story for years. Armen became a symbol of patience, dignity, and quiet strength. People continued to share his lessons, showing that courage and calmness could inspire more than anger or loud words ever could. After the final hearing, life slowly returned to normal for Armen, but the respect and admiration people had for him did not fade. His story continued to be shared on television, newspapers, and social media, and many people spoke about him as an example of patience and dignity. Yet Armen remained humble, continuing his daily routine as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Every morning he walked by the sea, feeling the gentle breeze and listening to the waves. The rhythm of the water reminded him of the lessons he had learned over the years. Life, like the ocean, had its calm moments and its storms, but remaining steady through it all was the true measure of strength. Neighbors greeted him with smiles. Children ran to him with excitement, and strangers occasionally approached to shake his hand. Each gesture of kindness reminded Armen that what mattered most was not attention or praise, but the simple connections people shared through respect and honesty. Judge Armen, meanwhile, faced the consequences of the courtroom events in his own way. The public attention had caused him to reflect deeply on his words and actions. He realized that authority without fairness was fragile, and he began to adjust his approach to others in his courtroom. He started listening more carefully, showing respect even to those who seemed ordinary, and his decisions became more balanced. Armen's calmness had not only affected the people watching, but had also inspired change in the very person who had spoken harshly to him. Back at home, Armen spent time organizing the small property he had finally secured. He looked at the land not as a prize but as a part of his family's history. Every corner reminded him of his father's hard work and the promise he had made to protect it. He felt peace knowing that he had done so without compromising his values. Children continued to visit him in the evenings. They would gather around, sitting on the soft grass near the shore, listening intently as Armen shared stories about his Navy days, about life lessons, and about the importance of patience, honesty, and courage. His stories were not only entertaining, but they also carried wisdom that the children absorbed naturally. One evening, a young girl asked, "Uncle Armen, how did you stay calm when the judge spoke so harshly?" Armen smiled gently and replied, "Sometimes people will say things to hurt or test you. Anger only grows the problem. Calmness, patience, and truth are stronger. When you respond with these, you win in a way that cannot be taken away." As the years passed, Armen's example became more than just a local story. Teachers in schools shared it with students as a lesson in patience and respect. Community leaders used it to encourage fairness and dignity in difficult situations. People from other towns and cities wrote letters thanking him for showing how one person's calm strength could inspire many. Armen himself never sought recognition. He continued to live simply, walking by the sea, helping neighbors when needed, and sharing his stories with children. Yet he understood that what had happened in the courtroom had created a ripple. His calm, patient response to public humiliation had taught people that true strength is not in anger, loud words, or force, but in quiet dignity and adherence to truth. The land, now rightfully his, became a place of reflection. Armen would often walk through it, feeling connected to his father and to the lessons life had given him. He knew that challenges would continue to come, but he was confident in the tools he had learned: patience, truth, and respect. Finally, Armen realized that the courtroom incident, once so painful, had given him an opportunity to teach and inspire. What could have been a moment of anger had turned into a story of courage and wisdom. The people who witnessed it, and those who heard about it afterward, had learned that dignity and calm strength can overcome even the harshest words. In the quiet of the evening, Armen sat by the shore watching the sun set over the water. The waves moved steadily, the sky glowed softly, and the world seemed peaceful. He smiled, knowing that patience and truth had guided him, that respect had been upheld, and that his story would continue to inspire many generations to come.